My name is Anya Sarang, and I work with Andrei Rylykov Foundation for Health and Social Justice. That's an organization in Moscow, Russia. The history of drug users movement in Russia started, I think, like in the late 90s of the last century, when people started to get together and discuss the issues of health and human rights of people who use drugs around the first harm reduction programs that were basically introduced by several international organizations such as Médecins du Monde, Médecins Sans Frontières, Open Society Foundation.
The Open Society Foundations in general is interested in testing what seems like common sense propositions or accepted wisdom against experience and civil society exchange and experiment. Because oftentimes things that seem like common sense or commonly accepted actually haven't been put to the test. The drug war is a very good example of that. It just seems to make sense that you should tell people to stop using drugs, that you should arrest people who won't stop using drugs, and that you should require people to stop using drugs before you offer them support. But the reality is, if you test that proposition and you look at it, you find that it doesn't reduce drug use. It doesn't actually help people to stop drugs to be incarcerated. It doesn't actually help health to be incarcerated. And it isn't true. Like what is commonplace wisdom is actually not true. So our interest in harm reduction has always been twofold. One has been about health and increasing the health of people who use drugs and decreasing the harms of drugs. And one has been about decreasing the harms of drug policies and even of a logic that says that we have to punish, and it just goes without question that that is the correct way to do something.
Harm reduction came here as an import product. You know, it was sort of somewhat alien to what people were used to. And I guess I was one of the, the traveling salesmen in that respect in the 90s. But what's really been remarkable, and it's also what I've noticed here, that people have made it their own. They've embraced the concept, again, the philosophy, and have applied that not only to the standard services of needle exchange or OSD treatment, but also to all kinds of other local needs, etc. The needs of women, the inclusion of people who use drugs.
In the late 90s, we had a huge new phenomenon of when all our friends started to use drugs, and everybody in my generation started to use drugs, and there were a lot of problems related to that. Many people have died of overdoses or suicide, or we started to lose many friends.
I found out that I'm HIV positive something like in 2000. There were just several of us. That was a small self-support group, and there was no any hopes for treatment at that time. And that's why we started to fight for the treatment and got acquainted with the people from Antifa movement and from the people who were making street actions. And they taught us to do all that because we know how to do it. And that's how actually Front AIDS appeared.
The project was devoted to making our antiretroviral treatment available for people who use drugs, because back then it was in big deficit, the treatment, and it was only provided to socially useful people. And of course, drug users were not considered as socially useful people. You had to prove that you are useful for this society, then you get the antiretrovirals. So that was the aim of Front AIDS, to make antiretrovirals available for everyone. And of course, people who use drugs, they were #1 on the list of those who were discriminated. Kaliningrad was the first place where Front AIDS activists chained themselves to the mayorate of the city, and they had the posters and the fire, and it was a very colorful action. It was, of course, followed by the police action, and it was informational team behind it. So it became very good resonant in Russia. A lot of media started to write about the problem, and then it made the problem visible, and there were several actions that follow, one in St. Petersburg, in Moscow. They were all very artistic.
When we were making street actions with Front Aids, it was times when people still were using faxes. One of the methods was a fax attack, because when the people were taken to the police department from the action, and it was actually my job to organize all the fax attacks, we were sending information about that all around the world. And people, activists from all around the world were sending fax into that police department and to the Ministry of Health. And I do remember the policeman who was like, "People, who are you? Where are you from?" Because they were looking at the fax from Uganda, saying just free these people, and they were understanding nothing, you know, what's going on, who are you?
Many people who participated in Front Aids, they were also people who use drugs, like for example, Andrei Rylkov. We named our foundation with his name because he was like a real, I don't know, for me and for my friends, he was a real hero. He was a drug user himself. He was part of all these drug users organizations or affiliations or affinities groups, and you know, also some radical environmentalist movement. So it was all kind of together, and he was inspiring the Front Aids movement with radical action idea.
В принципе, это наша основная задача, потому что люди не в состоянии сами решить эту проблему без политического решения, без государственной поддержки, без поддержки общества. Просто это нереально.
I think that was like one of the greatest moments in Russia in terms of activism, this bright and colorful and very strong, powerful actions.
I can't say that we were like really sure we will get it when we were making all these street actions. The main idea was actually not to die in silence, or just, yes, we are dying, and probably we will, because, you know, Russia is a big country, empire, and 1,000 die, 2,000 die, who cares, you know. And we had a hope that somebody will hear us, but we weren't absolutely sure, I wasn't, that it will work. Not only the access to ARVs was the aim, also it was the movement of people who use drugs, and also it was about the access to the substitution treatment, and about access to harm reduction programs. So it wasn't, but we were not really successful in that part. We finally got ARVs, but substitution treatment, no. And also I very clearly remember this meeting with it was Deputy Minister of Health. He said that, yes, you will get ARVs. And it was Irakez who asked him, and what about substitutional treatment? And he said no, definitely no, never. And I do remember his answer. He said like, well, this is very sad because I'm using and I'm tired. And he died, I think, in a couple of years after that. So this is, I think, that we were not able to reach. And still, you know, well, now substitutional treatment in Russia, it's not available.
In the European Union, they have methadone prescription programs. Does the Russian government think that maybe introducing this kind of programs can decrease the demand of drugs in Russia?
Что касается второго вопроса по заместительной терапии, так называемой, в большей части говорят, метадоновой терапии, то могу сказать, что в России поддерживается консолидированное мнение многих специалистов, и наркологов, и органов здравоохранения, наших научных специалистов против этого. Кроме того, научно доказанных клинических испытаний, подтверждающих полезность этого метода, пока наука мировая не располагает.
If you could clarify for us whether we can consider the restriction of access to sterile needles and the denial of methadone treatment to drug users a human rights violation. If you could talk about this.
Science is showing that when you give services And when you have you provide universal access, you can even make sure that you have 0 cases of HIV amongst drug users. We are seeing that in Netherlands, we are seeing that in Switzerland, we are seeing that in Germany, we are seeing that in so many parts of the world. So for me, and not giving the right of the people to have access to services, when those services can save life, it is a violation of human rights. And I'm just saying that like that.
When a country like Burma violates human rights, they're internationally isolated. When Russia comes to meetings like this and denies the science behind methadone and needle exchange and publicly refutes the science that we all believe in, not a word is said. And yet they're denying access to all these medications, to methadone, to sterile syringes, and there's no response. What can we do as an international community to actually put pressure on the Russians?
The IS doesn't really have an opportunity to put any formal pressure other than bringing the evidence and making the evidence known and basically highlight the gaps that are present.
Russia has the largest epidemic in the region with 1 million people infected with HIV, and we are deeply concerned by the non-availability of opioid substitution therapy and the fact that the vast majority of needle and syringe programs are being supported by external donations.
We personally believe that when scientific evidence is there, it needs to be used and used to reduce certain liver suffering.
There were some people who wanted to actually be involved in some strategic litigation around access to substitution treatment. And the first person was Lyosha Kurmanaevsky. He lived in Kazan, he was dependent on drugs, and he worked with the legal association Agora, and they submitted the first complaint to the European Court of Human Rights. So basically the complaint concerned his access to opioid substitution treatment with methadone and buprenorphine. He tried different forms of drug treatment available in Russia. Neither of them helped, and he wanted to try if opioid substitution treatment could help him. He applied to his local doctor, got refusal because it's prohibited in Russia, and then he went to the local court, got refusal again, and step by step they sent the complaint to the European Court on Human Rights. At the same time, other 2 activists, Irina Teplinskaya from then Kaliningrad and Ivan Anoshkin from Taliati, they also wanted to support this struggle, and they did the same thing. They also did a lot of press work, interviews, and explained their position, which was very also brave of them, because not many people back then were coming up on the, like mass media saying we are drug users. So they were super brave people. It was a big, I guess, political case. I don't know, because the communication was kind of too long. The decision has been taken just recently, last month, and it has been negative. The European Court has decided that it's the country should be able to decide if this form of treatment should be available for people. In their decision, the European Court said that the opioid substitution treatment is still controversial in the European countries, which is, of course, completely not evidence-based, and just the court was misinformed. But still, participation in this process has allowed to empower people and inspire more people to actively fight for their human rights. Now we are appealing this decision with the Grand Chamber, but we will only know. I mean, I don't know how big is the chance that they will. Yeah, that they will change the decision. I don't know.
Even though we talk about Russia all the time as a great failure because they ban methadone and buprenorphine and the government doesn't support needle and syringe programs, but the truth is there's a real spirit of harm reduction that has remained alive in Russia even without international funding, even without government funding, of drug users and people who ally themselves with drug users, saying we are going to continue doing outreach, we're going to continue speaking out, we're going to continue to bring a discussion of human rights to the international arena and even in the national press and in the national discourse.
So we had the Kolodets, drug users organization, various groups and affinities, and we have the Forum of People Who Use Drugs Now, and the Andrei Rylkov Foundation is also, in reality, is a drug user organization because it's driven by people who use drugs. Yeah, so we have these different forms, but what keeps us together is this inspiration to, make things better for, for people who suffer too much.
I'm David Subaliani. I'm a Georgian activist fighting for a human drug policy here in Georgia, but also in the region of Eastern Europe and Central Asia, as well as worldwide. I'm pretty poly-drug user. I like to use a number of drugs at the same time when I have a session. But regularly I have my choice of drugs, 3 or 4 different types that I use uninterrupted. In most of my time as a drug user, I felt like a very healthy person. I've never acquired any communicable infections. Thanks to the harm reduction I've been following and then teaching others also. I am former founder and active member of very famous White Noise movement that was operational in Georgia, in this country, for 3 years, starting from 2016. But now I'm associated with the Eurasian Network of People Who Use Drugs. That's a regional drug user organization that brings people who use drugs from many, many countries, basically the entire territory of former Soviet Union, some of the Eastern European countries. It's really fascinating to be to belong to this world where we are trying with friends, with colleagues, with other activists, people who are fighting for human lives and human rights. Yes!
მოგესალმებით, მე ვარ კოკა ლაბარტყავა, წარმოვადგენ არასამთავრობო ორგანიზაცია, სათემო ორგანიზაცია ახალ ვექტორს, რომელიც 2006 წლიდან ახორციელებს საკუთარ საქმიანობას საადვოკაციო და სერვისის მიწოდების თვალსაზრისით. ასევე წარმოვადგენ ქსელს ნარკოტიკების მომხმარებლები ჰუმანური ნარკოპოლიტიკისთვის. ეს არის ქსელი, რომელიც აერთიანებს ქვეყნის მასშტაბით 5 სათემო ორგანიზაციას, 4 საინიციატივო ჯგუფს და ასობით ნარკოტიკების მომხმარებელს. მეგობრებთან ერთად, როგორც გითხარით, ვარ პირველი ნარკოტიკების მომხმარებელთა ორგანიზაციის ფუძემდებელი ჩემს მეგობრებთან ერთად და შესაბამისად მთავარი მოტივი, რომ ჩვენ შეგვექმნა ორგანიზაცია, ეს იყო ის, რომ დაგვეცვა, ასე ვთქვათ, თავი იმ რეპრესიული ნარკოპოლიტიკისგან, რომელიც ადამიანების, ასე ვთქვათ, საწინააღმდეგოდ იყო ყოველთვის ჩვენს ქვეყანაში.
I was seeing how unjust the system was around me. I was witnessing many people just disappearing from my life, and we would learn that there was the jail that swallowed them and it took them away from us. For what? For just having some substances in their pockets. I was working in a bank as a senior project manager, and I was doing okay there, and I had pretty good income. But it was a point to decide that is this enough? So I decided to leave the bank and go fully into the activism. And I did another master's in drug policy and addiction science just to know more. I lost my economic state. I lost my house because I couldn't pay the credits anymore. But I won a lot. I never say that I shouldn't have done it. I'm really happy I did it. Georgia, like many other countries in the region, inherited Soviet system, of course, where, likewise the rest of the world, it was the prohibitionist policy was promoted. People who were using drugs, they were seen as criminals. I could say the Georgian drug policy is, I guess, one of the strictest in the world. People go for just anything above 1 gram is seen as extremely large amount, and people go to jail for 8 to 20 years, a lifetime. It's not surprising the Georgian prisons are full of people. Every third person, every third prisoner is there for drug use. So this policy brought to a situation where at some point people of Georgia got very angry about it. And little by little we brought it to, a political agenda, so that it was one of the priority issues in Georgian politics.
როდესაც ნარკოლოგიურ ტესტირებაზე ეს მასიური ტესტირებები იყო ჩვენთან და ეხლაც გრძელდება მეტნაკლებად, მაგრამ ისეთი ინტენსივობით არა. მასიურად 100,000-ობით ადამიანი გადაყავდათ ყოველწლიურად, ასე ვთქვათ, ნარკოლოგიურ დაწესებულებებში ბიოლოგიური მასალის, ასე ვთქვათ, ჩასაბარებლად რა. ეს იყო სრულიად შეურაცხმყოფელი, ასე ვთქვათ, დამამცირებელი, როდესაც ჩვენ საქმიანობას ქუჩაში ვახორციელებდით, ხელმოწერებს ვაგროვებდით, თემური ხატიაშვილი დააკავა პოლიციამ და წაიყვანა ნარკოლოგიურ ტესტირებაზე. რა ნარკოლოგიურ ტესტირებაზე. ჩვენ წინასწარ ვიცოდით, რომ კონსტიტუციის 42 მუხლი იცავს ადამიანს, რომ საკუთარი თავის წინააღმდეგ ჩვენება არ მისცეს. ეს ნარკოლოგიური ტესტირების შემთხვევაში ნიშნავდა იმას, რომ შენ შეგიძლია შენს წინააღმდეგ არ ჩააბარო არც ბიოლოგიური მასალა და არც კლინიკურ დათვალიერებაზე თქვა უარი. შესაბამისად მოხდა ისე, რომ თემური ხატიაშვილი წაიყვანეს და მან ამ უფლების შესახებ განუცხადა პოლიციის და იქ მყოფ სხვა თანამშრომლებს, რომ იგი არ, ასე ვთქვათ, მიცემდა ჩვენება საკუთარი თავის წინააღმდეგ. ეს იყო სრულიად მათთვის წარმოუდგენელი იმ წუთას, იმ წამს, რომ ასე ვთქვათ, ადამიანი იძახის ნარკოლოგიურ ტესტირებაზე უარს. შესაბამისად, ჩვენ კარგად ორგანიზებულად გარედან აქცია გქონდა უკვე ორგანიზებული და თემურიმ არაფრით, ასე ვთქვათ, არ გააკეთა ის, რასაც მას აიძულებდნენ. შესაბამისად, ეს იყო პირველი პრეცედენტი.
We started with the Constitutional Court case that we won against the state, that people just for keeping some weed at home for their personal use cannot be jailed.
The club became not only a place for entertainment, but a place on the way to and way from. You risk 5 to 8 years or more of your life to go to jail. So when you are in the club, it's no more an entertainment. It is the urge to substitute the reality which awaits you outside.
In 2017 it was, I think, police raided Georgian clubs. And we saw police brigades coming in with Kalashnikovs and trying to, stop us at the dance floor. Then the response was huge. The next day, Tbilisi Main Avenue in front of the Parliament building was 15 to 20,000 people just saying, we want to stop this. We are protesting what you just did. We want our freedom back. We saw around 10 big rallies of 10,000, 15,000 people coming together, staying together and demanding one thing, something that belongs to us, the freedom, right to choose your own life, and right not to be, demonized and not to be stigmatized, and forced away from the society just because you use certain substances.
We don't need to gain the decriminalization, we need to remove the criminalization. Because the criminalization is not something natural, which we need to go through, but it's been imposed on us unrighteously, and all world knows about it, and then evidence is compelling. And the positions of the opponents are cynical. So this is why in Georgia we declared the war against the war on drugs. Because we said this is not the war which we declared, but this is war which we will win. And other groups would criticize us because of the extreme language and this warrior image, you know. But that was the way to go, and that's what mobilized the communities. And when the community is backing you up, you are the strongest person in the world.
We had many dramatic days. What we managed to think was that we generated the hope, the realistic hope, and everybody in this country, including ourselves, we were assured, we knew that we would achieve the big point, that people who use drugs would be declared as non-criminals. There would be a big decriminalization to all people who use drugs. And it was White Noise Movement who was leading this fight, this episode. But then head of the police comes, gives us promises that he will change drug policy. We sort of tell people that, yeah, we should follow the authorities, you know, they're kind of trying to offer us something. Let's go home, let's stop our rallies. We don't need to protest anymore. And we do that, we stop everything there, and we get anything, we get nothing. This fight ended in a dramatic way in between, without really a logical end of the story. We don't have decriminalization. We haven't won anything big, but there is no movement. It's not surprising that White Noise could not come back after that, because many people who had trust in White Noise, they lost it.
კონცენტრირდები, თუმცა არ შემიძლია არ ვახსენო უპრეცედენტო კამპანია C ჰეპატიტის მიმართულებით, რომელიც დაახლოებით 10 წელი გრძელდებოდა და ჩვენ მივაღწიეთ იმას, რომ დღეს საყოველთაო ხელმისაწვდომობა, ასე ვთქვათ, აი ამ მკურნალებაზე.
We achieved that certain big stigma is removed from us. It's not so much stigmatized anymore to be a drug user, and what we see really is that families and friends of people who use drugs, who were arrested by police, nowadays are not ashamed to start their own rally and to start shouting, to start demanding that the rights of people who use drugs are taken seriously and with respect. We achieved that, for instance, in Georgia, not much anymore. People are being tested from streets, so urine samples aren't anymore taken, for testing, and people for using weed in this country aren't paying even any fine at the moment. So that's an achievement.
ყველა მინდა გავიხსენო ჩემი მეგობრები, ის ადამიანები, ვინც გარდაიცვალნენ და პატივი მივაგო მათ ხსოვნას. ფაქტიურად სახელმწიფო ისინი მოკლა. ჩვენ ყოველწლიურად 31 აგვისტოს აღვნიშნავთ ზედოზირებით გარდაცვლილთა საერთაშორისო დღეს და სწორედ იმ ადამიანების პატივსაცემად, რომელიც გარდაიცვალნენ აი ამ რეპრესიული ნარკოპოლიტიკის პირობებში ზედოზირებით, მათი ხსოვნის პატივსაცემად გავთ სიცოცხლის ხეებს. სიცოცხლე რა
The biggest enemy to us is not any infection or any substance. It's just the policy that's creating all the risks. Because if there was a humane drug policy, the one that we're promoting, we would never need to chase the governments for naloxone. We would everyone around us would have naloxone, and we would have close to zero number of people who are dying with overdose, and that wouldn't be an issue. If there was a humane drug policy, we wouldn't need to so much advocate for substitution therapy, because we just wouldn't need it. There would be an understanding of the need of it. wouldn't need to invest so much of our efforts around removing stigma, because the stigma is fueled by the law and by the regulations foremost. So unless, and that's why I always say, unless the state changes the policy, there is no way to reverse this bad stigma that's around us.
Меня зовут Оля Беляева. Я родилась в регионе Восточная Европа, Центральная Азия и Балтийские страны. Одно из первых столкновений с миром, которое у меня было сложное в подростковом возрасте, психоактивные вещества, в тот момент опиаты, они меня очень выручили. Они оказали самую сильную поддержку для того, чтобы я могла пройти определенные испытания роста. Когда я познакомилась с людьми, которые психонавты, которые занимаются психоделическими практиками, я поняла, насколько психоактивные вещества могут дать возможность расширить потенциал человека для того, чтобы быть в гармонии с миром. И поэтому сейчас для меня есть опыт использования веществ, от которых у меня есть зависимость, например, это опиаты. В течение 30 лет я употребляю опиаты, одно и то же вещество. 15 лет это в нелегальной репрессивной наркосцене, 15 лет в легальной регулируемой программе. То есть вещество одно и то же, другие обстоятельства, другие действия, и значит уже мое качество жизни, мое здоровье значительно улучшилось только потому, что программа стала легально регулируемой.
My name is Anton Basenko. I represent at least 3 networks of people who use drugs. Ukrainian network of people who use drugs, Eurasian network of people who use drugs, and international network of people who use drugs. I started in 1994 from stimulants, being a DJ. I started to use like ecstasy, amphetamines, cocaine. In 1996 I started with heroin just to use it as a sleeper after clubbing, but then I actually realized that I love this kind of high, and at least 11 years of active use, including street use of opioids. I started substitution therapy as one of the first patients in 2004. I'm still a patient of substitution therapy.
И я приехала в реабилитационный центр, и в котором я услышала о том, что есть в мире программы, в которых дают людям, употребляющим инъекционные вещества, шприцы, для того, чтобы люди берегли вены. И в этот момент у меня в голове взорвалась, то есть вспышка света. Я говорю, что? То есть кто-то беспокоится, чтобы я берегла вены. Там после центра обычно же движуха, там группы, какие-то встречи. Они говорят, у нас есть пару ящиков шприцев, вы возьмите, потому что, в принципе, надо раздавать, но мы не знаем где. В тот момент у меня была 9-ка машина красная. Мы договорились со знакомым, который торговал, чтобы он в углу во дворе, там у нас дом, значит, здесь угол, здесь стоит машина, друзья идут, открыт капот, в 9-ке там же, как получается, как полки магазины. И вот лежат там шприцы, хорошие шприцы, какие-то вырезки у нас на тот момент из чего-то. И я говорю, пожалуйста, возьмите инъекционный инструментарий, потом можете пойти закупиться. Реакция была, конечно, очень разная. Когда начали объяснять людям, мы сами были в шоке и смеялись с этого, мы не могли понять и поверить, но душой очень было радостно, что, вообще, что это возможно, в принципе.
It was the first public hearings in Ministry of Health about substitution therapy in Ukraine. There were like 2 key speakers. One is like a proponent of substitution therapy, and another is opponent of substitution therapy. And my doctor, narcologist, he asked me one day, like, Anton, you have such an interesting story of positive changes in substitution therapy as a person who uses drugs. Would you like to join these public hearings to speak a little bit about your life experience? And actually, that was my first lesson when I realized that my story can serve not only defending my right or supporting my goals, but also the broader number of people for whom this therapy is prescribed.
Так как у нас рядом были интересные люди, и доктор Леонид Власенко, и наши Дэниел Вульф, и Костя Леженцев, и Полтовец Денис, то есть настолько поддержка и интересные люди рядом, которые приносили технологии, знания и ресурсы. Поэтому создался благотворительный фонд «Виртус» с программ обмена. В 2005 году я пошла в программу заместительной терапии, и мы объединились в ассоциацию участников заместительной терапии. И первым шагом сделали выдачу на руки для самостоятельного приема. Одна область, вторая, третья, вот в каждой области находились люди, в своей области сделали, приезжают в соседнюю. Каждый день ходите, да? Да ладно. Я уже раз в 10 дней. Да ну ты что, как? За вас не сделаем, вместе пойдем. Родилась национальная движуха, люди начали у себя делать, потому что это важно.
Today in Ukraine, I can say that we have a particular success story with the drug users' rights movement. It's really organized now, and we have not only Ukrainian network of people who use drugs, but from 2018 we have Ukrainian network of women who use drugs, which is absolutely impressive thing. And we have now the network of almost 800 individual members and 40 organizations as a part of the national network of people who use drugs. We have our voices on the Cabinet of Ministers level, on the Ministry of Health level, so we have the equal voice in the decision-making process.
So it's never a one battle, and you need to fight every day, at every level. And it's nothing wrong about fighting, because if humankind gets some idea and starts discussing it, it means that this idea eventually will become a reality. But it makes a huge difference how much time and lives can it take before it becomes a reality.